So most people think that they are pretty good listeners, but I find that it's more often the case that people who are decent listeners have a hard time getting to the next level of listening, which would be active listening. So what we're going to go over now is the kind of top five or five reasons that stop a listener from becoming an active listener, and they're no particular order. So it's not like a top five thing. It's just the five reasons why people don't go from listening to active listening. And here's the thing, you might think that you're a good listener because, you make eye contact and you say things like, I hear what you're saying is, and things like that, which are all really good things. They're very good. But oftentimes, or rather, if you feel that you're not being heard entirely, or maybe the person that is speaking to you doesn't feel entirely heard, or there might be some confusion in which, we know shared meaning is really the ultimate goal of all communication. If that's lacking somewhere, then that probably means that you're lacking a little bit in active listening. So here again, here's the five reasons why people go or fail to go from listening to active listening. So right off the bat, number one is one that I guarantee that you're going to identify, which is people tend to have to listen to respond as opposed to listening to understand. I guarantee you know what I'm talking about in that if you're thinking of the next thing you're going to say, or a thought pops up into your head that you want to respond to that person or argue with that person right off the bat, that's generally when you're listening to respond, is they're listening to fully understand and embrace with curiosity what that person is saying. And what you'll find is that it usually happens pretty quickly. When you have somebody that wants to jump in, like maybe you take a breath and they jump in with a comment or they jump in with something they want to argue with you about, that's generally somebody who has a tendency to listen to respond instead of listening to comprehend or listen to understand. I find myself doing it as well. It's not like it's super easy to avoid doing that. What I also find is that people who want to oftentimes quibble are people who are listening to respond. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. If you're going through a conversation, whether it's a deep conversation, which is generally what we're talking about here with active listening, or it's just a casual conversation, and you say something, and then somebody will argue with you about the semantics you use or some sort of detail associated with a past event that you're trying to describe to them and how it impacted you, and they jump in and they want to quibble with the detail, right? So if I had to share with somebody something that happened to me that this person did or this person said, and part of the detail of that history is, well, this room was blue that we were standing in, and immediately the person chimes in, well, no, actually the room was green. Or if I say to somebody, well, you got kind of mad about that thing, and I want to talk to you about why that is, and immediately they say, well, I wasn't mad, I was just more upset. Well, what they're doing is they're really quibbling with some of the details that's really not appropriate, right? So they're listening to respond, they're not listening to understand. Is it really that important that the room was blue? Unless you're literally arguing about paint colors, right? Is it really that important that the room's blue or green or red? Not really. You're missing the bigger picture of the thing that the person is trying to convey to you. Is really that important? The detail of what the person is saying? Or are you trying to, or are you missing the overall picture? How important is it that you tried to express to somebody that you were frustrated versus mad? You had a feeling, and that feeling impacted somebody, and they're trying to express to you how that feeling impacted them. So you quibbling or arguing or wanting to respond quickly over that one little bit of a detail is evidence that you're not listening to comprehend or understand. You're listening to respond, and it's never an easy thing to fix that. One thing that I tell people when it comes to those deeper conversations, especially if they're intentional, they're going to plan deeper conversations, have something nearby to write with. So if you have want to take a note really quick about something that you want to address or ask, then that's important. You want to capture that as an important question later on as a listener. But when you write it down, you have a tendency to then it's kind of set aside in your mind, and you can move forward with listening with genuine curiosity. The other thing to remember is if you have a thought that pops in that you genuinely want to respond to with this person as you're listening to them, think you can consider that thing either trivial or important. If it's important, it will come up again. Like you will remember it at the end of the person expressing what they're trying to express, fully express it. You'll remember it later on. So it's pretty important. But if you forget that you wanted to address the issue of the color of the room or the feeling that you were feeling versus bad or frustrating, it was trivial. So giving yourself an opportunity to remember it later is really important. So thinking to yourself, yeah, the things that pop in my head aren't always going to be dimes of perfection that I or of perfect things that I want to address. So we can forget those things. That it's okay, right? But if you actually remember it later, then it clearly was pretty important to you. All right. So number two, the number two reason that people have a tendency to not get from uh, or to stop getting from listening to active listening is something that we have all done. I've done it. I actually try to avoid doing it nowadays because I register that I did this, I used to do this quite a bit. And actually, my mom and I, she's probably watching this, but she and I had a really, really kind of fun, interesting conversation about this exact thing that people have a penchant to do, which is to invoke or use kind of a personal anecdote to shift the center of the conversation away from the speaker to the listener, right? And I think most people, when they do that, and I think most, if not all people that do that, are coming from a place of real empathy. They're trying to show empathy to a person. They want to connect with them. They want to show, hey, I've also experienced this thing. And so I completely understand where you're coming from when you say this thing. It would be something like, "Hey, they have that happened to me too," or "Hey, I remember that reminds me of a time when this happened," or so on and so forth. And so it's very common that you do that. And again, it comes from a place. I genuinely think it comes from a place of empathy, but it doesn't always land the way that people think it lands. More often than not, people think to themselves when you're a speaker and somebody says to that in response to something, says that to someone, something that you've said or in response to something you've said, it takes the frame away. It takes the person that's speaking wants to be the center of that, right? And although you're trying to show that empathy, you're really pulling frame away from them and you're bringing it onto yourself. That's not active listening. That's just listening. Okay. So to be a good active listener, we don't want to necessarily always include an anecdote, at least not right away. You can use that if it becomes valuable later after the person has fully expressed their idea or fully expressed or articulated how they feel and everything. And then that empathy can come in and we can relate better. But right away, no, we want to avoid that. You don't necessarily have to relate to them in that moment to show that you're kind of being empathetic. It is, again, it's trying to show shared meaning and it's trying to show connection. But sometimes an active listener, it doesn't always require comparison. Sometimes it's just going to take presence, right? It just takes listening, right? And not necessarily comparing what they went to with something that you went through later on. All right, number three, the third reason why people don't tend to get from listening to active listening is listeners will confuse fixing with helping, right? So many listeners are deeply uncomfortable with sitting with somebody else's discomfort. So they fix things as quickly as they possibly can, or they respond as quickly as they possibly can. Like they'll say something like, well, at least, you're not going through this, or it's not that bad because, people over here are way worse off, right? So they try um, to move past the discomfort that somebody's trying to express to them. And in order to do that, they try to, they try to make the person feel a little bit better. Again, it comes from a place of empathy, but really what that does is it minimizes what the person's going through in that moment. So it's more valuable in that moment sometimes to just sit in that discomfort, sit in that quiet discomfort and be aware of it instead of trying to minimize it or make them feel better about their situation because somebody else has it worse, right? That's not helpful. Okay. That's really not active listening. We don't need to rely so much on, it could be worse, right? We don't need to rely on that so much. In meaningful relationships, we really want to make sure that the person feels fully articulated. And when you jump in and try to do that and minimize that, I think most people are trying to come from a place of empathy, but that really doesn't create shared meaning in that dialogue, right? It really, really doesn't. All right, number four, the fourth reason why people don't get from listening to active listening is listeners will filter everything through their own beliefs and biases quite a bit. And again, these are things that are pretty well universal. So no one necessarily listens neutrally, right? You listen through the lens of your own experience, your own feelings, your own everything, right? And when we do that, you almost have a tendency to say, to internally critique what the person is saying and how hard they have it, right? You say, well, they're going through a thing, but then in your brain, because you're looking at what they're experiencing and listening, but you're experiencing it through your lens, you might be thinking to yourself, well, it's not that bad, or I've done that before, and it wasn't that big of a deal, right? So again, you're minimizing it, but you're internally minimizing it to yourself. You may not be expressing that to the person, but that's going to seriously impact how you understand and articulate moving forward if you're consistently, from your own biases and from your own lens, minimizing what that person went through or maximizing it. It could be the opposite, where if somebody's expressing something to you and they're kind of saying it's not that big of a deal, But you're saying, oh my gosh, it is a really big deal, because in your head you're thinking that is a really big deal because I went through this thing a year ago and it took me a year to recover, and so on and so forth. That could be the case, but again, that's looking through your lens, not through theirs, right? So active listening requires you to look through as best you can, or rather listen to how they articulate this through their lens, okay, not through your own. And the number five, the last reason that people have a tendency to not get from listening to active listening is listeners fear silence and emotional depth. This speaks also to that sometimes fear of discomfort that we've talked about in the past, or that we even talked about here in this particular video, is when a speaker sits in their emotion and they might start tearing up. They might, so their chin might start quivering. You can see some real discomfort in them. Okay, there is this tendency for a listener to want to correct that discomfort, or what's a better word, to, well, comfort that discomfort. And in doing so, you take away that opportunity for that person to feel that discomfort and sit in it for a little while. So here's the thing, folks: silence is golden. Okay, especially when you're talking to people and you're having a difficult conversation. Silence is absolutely golden. So when you find yourself in a position where somebody is expressing something or emoting, and they're having a hard time keeping a calm, and maybe they're starting to cry, you start to see that they're just sitting and they're very pensive, and you want to fill the silence. Don't. Just sit there, listen carefully, make good eye contact with them, and make sure that they know that you're there to listen. And that will further help you to practice and be better at active listening and get what we always want out of communication, which is shared meaning. All right. So I appreciate everybody listening. By the way, something else I want to throw out there for everybody is, at this point, you should see the link that you can send to me, or rather my email address that you can send to me. I had a thought. I thought maybe if everybody wants to, if you're watching this, if you have a situation or you want some coaching insight onto something maybe you're going through, I'd be glad to read an email and maybe give you my perspective on it at the end of one of our videos, or maybe even a video that comes out later that applies that particular situation. I mean, understand the email you send me is not going to be necessarily anonymous in the email, but I'm certainly not going to share your information here. Definitely not. I have a code of ethics associated with coaching that I can't do that. But I'd love to hear from you guys. I'd love to hear some ideas that you have for other coaching insights, or if you're dealing with something personally or professionally, and you want to get some coaching insight, I'd be glad to do it. All right. So, hey, you guys have a great day. Yeah,